Some places are not meant to be disturbed. Not because they are dangerous, but because they remember. Tonight's story comes from rural Thailand, where an old cemetery stands forgotten behind a temple no longer in use. Locals avoid it after sunset, not out of superstition, but experience. They say if you walk too close, something may reach out from the ground and pull your leg. And if that happens, survival is not the same as escape. Chapter 1. The Cemetery Behind Wat Phra Sai. There is an old cemetery on the outskirts of Nakhon Pathom, hidden behind the abandoned grounds of Wat Phra Sai. No official map marks it anymore. The monks stopped accepting burials there decades ago, and the villagers pretend it no longer exists. But everyone knows the place. They just never speak its name out loud after sunset. Locals call it the Forgotten Ground. Not because the dead were forgotten, but because those who remembered it never stayed the same. I was 27 that year, working as a long-haul truck driver, hauling timber between provinces. On one particular evening, my truck broke down on a narrow dirt road that ran directly alongside the old cemetery. The engine died without warning, as if something had reached inside and twisted its breath shut. The sun was already sinking, bleeding orange light through the trees. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp soil and decaying leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a single temple bell rang, too late for evening prayer. I should have stayed inside the cab. That was the first mistake. When I stepped down, the temperature dropped instantly, not the coolness of nightfall, but a cold that clung to my ankles and crept upward. Slow and deliberate, the cemetery fence stood a few meters away, crooked and half-buried, its wooden posts rotting into the earth as if being swallowed. There were no birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before entering that place. As I lifted the hood to check the engine, I felt something else, an awareness. Sharp and sudden, like the moment before someone calls your name. I had the strange sensation of being counted, measured, as if the ground itself was deciding whether I belonged there. The villagers used to warn us drivers. If your vehicle stops near that cemetery at dusk, don't touch the ground. I laughed at those words back then. Standing there, alone, with the light fading and the shadows stretching between the graves, I finally understood why no one crossed that road at night. Because once the sun disappears behind Wat Phra Sai, the cemetery does not sleep. It watches. Chapter 2. The sound that walked behind me. At first, it was barely noticeable. A faint sound, soft, uneven, like dry grass being brushed aside by a dragging foot. It came from somewhere behind me, close enough to raise the hair on my neck, yet distant enough to feel unreal. SHRRRK, SHRRRK. I froze. The sound stopped instantly, as if it had never existed. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a stray dog. Maybe the wind finally found its way through the trees. I leaned back over the engine, forcing my hands to keep moving, pretending my heartbeat wasn't hammering against my ribs. Then I heard it again. This time, it was closer. Not footsteps, no rhythm, no balance. It was the sound of something being pulled, not walking, as if one leg refused to lift from the ground. I turned around. There was no one there. The road behind me was empty, stretching into darkness. The cemetery fence stood silent, its shadow warped and broken against the dirt. No movement, no shapes, nothing that explained the sound. Yet the feeling remained. I wasn't alone anymore. When I turned back to the truck, the sound returned, but now it followed my movements. When I leaned forward, it paused. When I shifted my weight, it dragged again. Always behind me. Always just out of sight. In Thai folklore, the elders say that spirits who die violently do not walk like the living. They follow, staying at the exact distance where you can feel them but cannot see them. If you hear their steps, it means they are already aware of you. I swallowed hard and wiped sweat from my brow. My hands were shaking now. I could feel it watching the back of my legs, studying them, memorizing their shape. Then something worse happened. The sound stopped completely. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like pressure on my ears. Even the night insects had gone quiet. I stood there, breath held, knowing, deep in my bones, that whatever had been behind me was no longer moving. It had stopped because it had arrived. And in that moment, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. Whatever was following me was no longer behind me.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The Grave Without a Name. I should have stayed where I was. Every instinct screamed at me to climb back into the truck, to lock the doors and wait for daylight. But fear does strange things to the mind. It convinces you that movement is safety, that standing still is surrender. So I took a step away from the engine. The ground beneath my boots felt different, softer, uneven, as if it had been disturbed recently. The air grew colder with each step I took toward the cemetery fence. Even though I hadn't planned to go any closer, my body moved before my thoughts could stop it. That was when I saw it. Between two leaning gravestones, half hidden by weeds and fallen leaves, was a patch of earth darker than the rest. There was no headstone, no carved name, just a shallow mound of soil, sunken in the middle, with a thin bamboo stick stabbed into the ground like a careless marker. And in front of it, there were marks. Long, shallow grooves carved into the dirt, running away from the grave and stopping abruptly near the road. They looked like something had been dragged across the ground, slowly, painfully, then pulled back again. My throat went dry. In rural Thailand, unmarked graves are feared more than old ones. A grave without a name means no prayers, no monk, no closure. It means the dead were buried in a hurry, or in secret. I crouched down, unable to stop myself. The grooves were fresh. I reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the soil. It was cold, not cool, cold, like it had never felt the sun. A sharp chill shot up my arm, and I pulled my hand back instinctively. That was when I felt it. A presence. Not behind me. Not beside me. Below. The ground beneath the nameless grave seemed to pulse. Faintly, like a slow heartbeat. I suddenly became aware of my legs, how close they were. How vulnerable. A memory surfaced uninvited, my grandmother's voice, whispering warnings when I was a child. Thai spirits don't grab your hands, she used to say. They pull you by the legs, because that's how they take you home. The bamboo stick creaked softly. I stood up too fast, dizzy with fear, and that was when I noticed something else. My footprints ended behind me. But beside the grave, there was another trail. A single, uneven line in the dirt, leading straight toward my feet. Something had already begun to move. Chapter 4. The cold grip at my ankle. I didn't feel the hand at first. What I felt was the cold. It crept around my left ankle like water seeping into a crack, slow, patient, impossible to stop. The chill wasn't sharp or sudden. It was deliberate, as if something beneath the ground was testing me, learning where my skin was thinnest. I tried to step back. My foot didn't move. A strange pressure wrapped around my ankle. Not tight, not loose, just enough to let me know I was no longer in control. My breath caught in my throat as the realization settled in. Something was touching me. And it did not belong to the living. Then it tightened. Fingers. Long, thin, cold as buried stone. They closed around my ankle with a strength that made my knees buckle. I screamed and fell forward, my palms slamming into the damp earth. Mud filled my mouth. The taste was bitter, ancient, like soil that had never known daylight. I twisted my body and looked back. The ground had opened. From the dirt beside the nameless grave, a hand had emerged, gray and slick. Its skin stretched tight over bone. The fingernails were blackened and curved, packed with earth. They were not gripping me in panic or rage. They were hooked into me. As I struggled, the hand pulled. Not fast. Not violently. It dragged me an inch at a time. My leg burned as my body scraped across roots and stones. I kicked with my free foot, but the soil seemed to resist me, as if the ground itself was leaning inward. Every movement I made only brought me closer to the grave. Then something else happened. Another bulge formed in the earth. A second hand broke through the surface. Then a third, each one reaching blindly, feeling for me, clawing at my boots, my calf, my knee. The dirt trembled, loose soil collapsing inward as if the grave was breathing. I realized then that it wasn't pulling me down. It was pulling me back. Back to where it believed I belonged. From beneath the ground came a sound, low, wet, and broken, like air being forced through a throat that had forgotten how to speak. I felt the vibration travel up my leg, into my spine. I stopped screaming. Because somewhere deep inside me, I understood something far worse than fear. This wasn't an attack. It was a claim.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. Dragged toward the grave. The pulling grew stronger. Not sudden, not savage, but steady. Relentless, like a tide that did not care whether you fought or not. My body slid across the ground, my clothes tearing on roots and broken stone. Every inch I was dragged closer to the nameless grave felt final. Irreversible. I dug my fingers into the dirt. The soil gave way too easily, crumbling through my hands as if it had already accepted me. My nails split, pain flared, but it meant nothing. Pain was a living thing, and I was being introduced to something that existed beyond it. The hands tightened their grip. One wrapped around my ankle, another hooked behind my knee, a third clutched the hem of my jeans, pulling with a strength that didn't feel muscular, but anchored, as if it were drawing power from the earth itself. I screamed again, but the sound felt wrong, thin and distant, like it belonged to someone else. That was when I noticed the ground around me. It was moving. Small tremors rippled outward from the grave, spreading through the soil like veins beneath skin. Mounds rose and fell, slowly, subtly, too controlled to be imagined. From the corners of my vision, I saw fingers breaking through the surface in places I hadn't touched. Not reaching for me yet. Waiting. A horrible realization settled in my chest. This wasn't one spirit dragging me back. It was the cemetery responding. In Thai belief, places where the dead were buried improperly become hungry. Not for flesh but for balance. For a body to replace what was disturbed, forgotten, or denied its rights. I felt something brush against my calf. Not a hand this time. Hair. Long, wet strands slid across my skin, clinging to me like seaweed. I looked down, my vision blurring with tears, and saw a shape rising halfway from the ground, a shoulder. A bent spine, a head that never fully emerged. The face stayed hidden, but I heard the breath. Slow, shuddering, patient. The pulling stopped suddenly. For one terrifying moment, everything went still. Then the hands yanked hard, once. My body slammed against the edge of the grave. Loose soil collapsed beneath me, and I felt myself begin to slide inward, toward the darkness where the ground had already opened. I clawed at the grass, my fingers closing around something solid. A root. I held on with everything I had left. And as I hung there, suspended between the living world and the dead, a thought pierced through my panic, cold and clear. If I let go now, nothing would ever pull me back. Chapter 6. The one who never closed her eyes. The earth shifted beneath me. The root in my hands creaked, fibers stretching to their limit. Dirt trickled down my arms, into my sleeves, into my mouth. I could feel the grave breathing below me, slow, heavy, patient, as if it knew time was on its side. Then the ground in front of me collapsed inward. Not violently. Carefully. A section of soil sank, peeling away like wet cloth, and something began to rise from beneath it. At first, I thought it was just another arm. Then I saw the curve of a shoulder, pale and slick with mud, followed by a neck bent at an unnatural angle. Finally, a face emerged. Her skin was gray, stretched too tight across her bones. Clumps of soil clung to her hair, which hung in heavy, tangled sheets over her shoulders. But it was her eyes that froze the breath in my chest. They were wide open, unblinking, unmoving. They stared straight at me, pupils clouded, reflecting nothing, not the moonlight, not my face. Eyes that had never been closed. Eyes that had been forced to watch the earth fall in on them. Her mouth trembled. At first, no sound came out, just the faint movement of lips rubbing together, as if she were remembering how speech worked. Then a whisper crawled out of her throat, broken and wet, barely louder than the soil settling around us. "Give it back." Her voice wasn't angry. It was exhausted. One of her hands rose and pressed against the ground, fingers digging in. I saw then that her nails were cracked and split, worn down as if she had clawed at the inside of her grave for a very long time. "Give my place back?" I shook my head, tears blinding me. I didn't take anything, I whispered, I swear. Her eyes twitched. For a moment, I thought she was going to scream. Instead, her gaze dropped to my legs, to where the other hands were still wrapped around me, holding me in place. Understanding hit me like a blow. She didn't mean an object. She meant space. A place among the living. A place denied when she was buried without rights, without a name, without rest, and now the ground was trying to correct that imbalance with me. Her fingers curled again. The pull resumed, stronger than before. Her mouth opened wider, stretching unnaturally, and from it came a sound that was not quite a cry and not quite a breath, something between longing and hunger. That was when the wind changed. And somewhere beyond the trees, a sound arose that did not belong to the dead. A human voice, chanting.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. When the chant reached the dead. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The sound was faint, almost swallowed by the night, low, uneven rhythm drifting through the trees. It didn't come from one direction, but from everywhere at once, as if the air itself were vibrating. A chant. Human voices. Monks. The hands around my legs tightened in response. As if startled, the woman's eyes flickered, not toward the sound, but away from it. Her mouth closed abruptly, her lips pressing together like something being sealed shut. The chanting grew clearer. Each syllable rose and fell with deliberate calm. Ancient words spoken not to command, but to remind. The wind carried the sound across the cemetery, brushing over the graves, sinking into the soil. Something beneath me shifted. The pulling slowed. One of the hands loosened its grip, fingers trembling as if unsure. Another released my knee entirely and slipped back into the earth, leaving behind a dark imprint in the dirt. The woman let out a sound, sharp, fractured, almost like a sob forced backward into her throat. Her eyes darted from my legs to the ground around her, as if she were suddenly aware of how many were listening. The chant continued. I felt it then, not fear, not relief, but resistance. The cemetery itself seemed to recoil, the soil tightening, the subtle movements beneath the ground growing confused and uneven. The hunger I had felt before wavered, replaced by something closer to hesitation. Her fingers dug into the dirt. No, she whispered, the word barely forming. It wasn't a plea, it was frustration, like someone interrupted just before finishing a long, exhausting task. The hands withdrew one by one. They didn't retreat quickly. They sank back into the soil slowly, reluctantly, as if being pulled away by an unseen force. The grip around my ankle loosened last of all, fingers lingering, cold brushing against my skin before finally letting go. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping. The woman's body began to sink as well. Her shoulders disappeared beneath the soil, then her neck, then her face. Her eyes never left mine, not until the earth closed over them, hiding that unblinking stare once more. The ground settled. The chanting faded, carried away by the wind until only silence remained. I lay there, shaking uncontrollably, my legs numb, my clothes soaked with mud and sweat. I was alive. But the cemetery felt different now. Not defeated. Just paused. Somewhere deep beneath the ground, something shifted, restless, unfinished. I understood then that this wasn't an ending. It was a delay. And as I struggled to my feet, one terrifying thought echoed in my mind. They had let me go. But they had not forgotten me. Chapter 8. The Keeper of the Forgotten Ground. I was still on my knees when I saw the light. It flickered at the edge of the cemetery, weak and unsteady, cutting through the darkness like a hesitant thought. At first, I feared it was another trick of the night, something meant to lure me back. But the chanting had already faded, and this light moved with purpose. A man emerged from between the trees. He was old, older than the road, older than the fence, it seemed. His back was bent, his steps slow, deliberate. In his hand, he carried an oil lamp, its flame trembling in the night air. He did not look surprised to see me there, covered in mud, shaking like a hunted animal. "You stepped where you shouldn't," he said calmly. His voice was dry, steady, as if he were stating a simple fact about the weather. I tried to speak, but my throat refused to cooperate. I could only nod. The old man glanced toward the nameless grave. His eyes lingered there longer than anywhere else. Not with fear. With recognition. That one never rests. He continued, not because she wants to stay. Because no one ever let her leave. He told me he was the keeper of the grounds. Not officially. Just someone who had lived nearby long enough to remember when the cemetery was still used. When the monks still came. When the dead were given names and prayers. Years ago, he said, a woman was brought there at night. No coffin, no chanting, just a body wrapped in cloth and buried quickly. Like a mistake someone wanted to erase. She had died violently, killed and hidden. Her death never spoken of again. No rites, the old man said softly. No closing of the eyes. That's why she watches. I looked down at my ankle. A dark bruise had already formed, shaped like fingers. The keeper lifted his lamp slightly, illuminating the ground. When the dead are buried wrong, he said, the land remembers. It looks for balance, someone to stand where they should have stood. He finally looked at me. You were close. That's all it takes. I asked him why the chanting had helped. He sighed, because it reminded them they were seen, not forgiven, just acknowledged. The old man turned away, beginning to walk back toward the trees. Before he disappeared, he spoke one last time, without looking back. Go, and don't come here again after dark. As I staggered toward my truck, one truth settled heavily in my chest. I hadn't survived because I was strong. I had survived because something else had interrupted the cemetery's choice.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. No one leaves whole. The truck started on the second try. The engine coughed, sputtered, then finally roared back to life, breaking the silence like a sudden scream. The sound felt wrong in that place, too loud, too alive, but I didn't hesitate. I climbed into the cab, slammed the door shut, and locked it with shaking hands. As I drove away, I didn't look back. I told myself there was no reason to. That what I had seen was finished. Buried again, but the feeling stayed with me, heavy and persistent, like something clinging to the back of my legs. Invisible but present. The road stretched ahead, empty and pale under the moonlight. Trees blurred past, their shadows reaching toward the truck as if trying to slow me down. My ankle throbbed with a deep, aching cold that didn't feel like pain. It felt like memory. When I finally reached the main road, I pulled over and got out. Under the yellow glow of a street lamp, I rolled up my pant leg. The bruise had darkened, spreading across my skin in the clear shape of fingers, too long, too thin to belong to a living hand. The skin around it was icy to the touch, even though the night air was warm. I scrubbed at it until my skin burned. The mark didn't fade. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a roadside motel, locked the door, and pushed a chair against it like a child afraid of the dark. I barely slept. When I did, the dream came immediately. I was lying on damp grass, staring up at a moon that never moved. Something tugged gently at my ankle, not pulling, just testing. Each time I tried to sit up, the ground softened beneath me, giving way inch by inch. I woke up gasping. My ankle was cold. From that night on, small things began to change. I noticed it first while walking, my left foot sometimes lagging behind, as if resisting each step. Occasionally, when I stood still too long, I felt a faint pressure around my ankle, like fingers resting there without closing. I didn't tell anyone. In Thailand, we don't speak openly about such things. Saying them out loud gives them weight, shape, attention, and attention, I had learned, was dangerous. The old keeper's words returned to me again and again. You were close. That's all it takes. I understood now what he meant. I had left the cemetery alive. But something of me had stayed behind. And something from there had come with me. Chapter 10. When sleep became another grave. Sleep was no longer rest. It became a place I fell into unwillingly. A second cemetery where my body lay still while something else moved. Every night, no matter how exhausted I was, I delayed closing my eyes. I drank coffee until my hands shook. I kept the television on, the lights bright, as if noise and light could anchor me to the living world. They didn't. The moment I drifted off, the dream returned. It always began the same way. I was lying on my back, staring at the sky, not the ceiling of my room, the sky. Vast, empty, without stars. The ground beneath me was cool and damp, pressing against my shoulders, my spine, the back of my head. I didn't need to look down to know where I was. The cemetery behind Wat Phra Sai. My legs were stretched out in front of me, half sunken into the earth, as if the soil had softened just for them. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, slow, like it belonged to someone who had been buried for too long. Then came the touch. At first, it was gentle. A light pressure around my ankle, almost careful, as if whoever touched me was afraid of waking me. Fingers slid against my skin, cold and familiar. They never grabbed all at once. They always tested first, one finger, then another, waiting for permission. In the dream, I screamed. No sound came out. The pulling began gradually. My body slid across the grass, not violently, but with a patience that terrified me more than force ever could. Each inch felt rehearsed, practiced, as if this had been done many times before, with others. I woke up every time just before reaching the grave. My heart would be pounding, my throat raw, my sheets tangled around my legs. And always, my left ankle was ice cold, long after the rest of my body warmed. One morning, I found dirt under my fingernails. I stared at my hands for a long time, trying to explain it away. Sleepwalking, maybe, stress, hallucinations brought on by fear. But deep down, I knew better. The dreams weren't memories. They were rehearsals. Something was practicing how to take me without resistance. I began to notice other signs. When I lay still too long, I felt the bed dip slightly near my feet, as if someone had sat down. Once, half awake, I felt a slow, deliberate tug on the blanket, just enough to expose my ankle to the air. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After that night, I started sleeping with my legs tied together using a belt. A childish precaution I never admitted to anyone. It didn't stop the dreams. It only made them more detailed. And with each passing night, one truth became harder to deny. Whatever had touched me in the cemetery was no longer waiting for darkness. It was waiting for sleep.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The Confession That Should Not Be Spoken. I tried to endure it in silence. In Thailand, we grow up learning that certain experiences are meant to be carried alone. To speak of them is to invite them closer. To name them is to give them shape. For weeks, I told myself that if I stayed quiet long enough, whatever followed me would lose interest. It didn't. One morning, as I was getting dressed for work, I caught sight of my ankle in the mirror and froze. The bruise had changed. It was no longer a fading mark, it was darker now. Deeper, the outline sharper, 5 distinct shapes pressed beneath the skin, as if fingers were gripping me from the inside. The skin around it was pale and cold. I touched it and flinched. The sensation wasn't pain, it was pressure, like something pushing outward, testing the boundary between my body and the world. That was the moment I realized I couldn't do this alone. I went to see my aunt, a woman known in our family for understanding things that didn't fit neatly into logic. She lived on the edge of town. Near a small shrine she tended herself. When she saw my face, she didn't ask what was wrong. She looked at my legs. "You stepped somewhere you shouldn't have," she said. Her certainty broke something in me. I rolled up my pant leg with trembling hands and showed her the mark. She inhaled sharply and turned away, murmuring a prayer under her breath before looking back at me. "When did you tell someone about it?" she asked. "I haven't," I said. "You're the first." Her expression darkened. "That's dangerous," she whispered. "Some things listen for their names." I told her everything then. The cemetery, the nameless grave, the hands, the woman who never closed her eyes. As I spoke, the room grew colder. The incense at her shrine flickered, its smoke curling unnaturally toward the floor. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. "You weren't attacked," she finally said. "You were chosen." The word settled heavily between us. She explained that spirits tied to places, especially those buried without rites, sometimes seek replacements. Not out of malice, but exhaustion. They look for someone close enough, vulnerable enough, to pull into their space. You survived because the chanting interrupted it, she said, but the bond was already made. I asked her if it would stop. She didn't answer right away. Some connections fade, she said carefully. Others wait. She stood and lit a candle, pressing it into my hands. If the dreams change, she warned, if the pulling feels gentler, come back immediately. As I left her house, one thought echoed louder than any fear I had felt before. The worst things don't chase you. They wait for you to stop running. Chapter 12. The Night of the Unsettled Offering. We returned to the cemetery just before midnight. My aunt insisted it had to be done then, when the boundary between worlds thinned. When the dead were most aware, and the living least protected. The road behind Wat Phra Sai looked unchanged, but I felt it immediately. The air was heavier, quieter, as if the night itself were holding its breath. The nameless grave waited exactly where I remembered it. A small wooden table was set before it, covered with offerings, rice, water, flowers, candles, and incense. No food meant to tempt, only items meant to acknowledge, to admit presence without inviting possession. My aunt lit the incense slowly, one stick at a time. Do not speak her name, she warned. If she had one, it was taken from her. Tonight is not about remembering who she was. It is about letting her go. As the incense burned, the wind began to stir. Not a gust, just a steady movement, circling us, brushing against my ankles. My skin prickled. The bruise beneath my pant leg pulsed faintly, responding like a wound that recognized its cause. The chanting began. Not loud, not commanding. It was a prayer for those who had died unseen, unheard, unclaimed, words meant to reach the ground rather than the sky. With each verse, the soil around the grave trembled slightly, as if something beneath it were shifting position. Then the temperature dropped. The candles flickered violently, their flames bending inward toward the grave. The air filled with the smell of damp earth and old incense, thick, suffocating, familiar. I felt the pull again. Not strong, not urgent, gentle. A pressure around my ankle, like a hand resting there without closing. My legs trembled, but I didn't move. My aunt's voice remained steady, never breaking rhythm. From the grave came a sound. Not a cry. A long, shuddering exhale. The ground sank inward slightly, then slowly rose back into place. The pressure around my ankle faded. The cold receded, inch by inch, until my leg felt like it belonged to me again. The wind stopped. When the last incense stick burned out, the night felt empty. Not peaceful, but no longer crowded. My aunt bowed once toward the grave. She has been acknowledged, she said quietly. That may be enough. As we left the cemetery, I didn't feel watched. For the first time since that night, I felt alone. But deep inside, a quiet thought lingered, unwanted, unresolved. Acknowledgement is not the same as release. And some bonds don't break. They loosen.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The Silence That Followed. The days after the ritual felt unreal. I woke each morning expecting to find the familiar cold wrapped around my ankle. The dull pressure that had become part of my body. But it wasn't there. My leg felt warm, normal. When I pulled up my pant leg, the bruise was fading, not slowly, but as if it had never belonged to my skin in the first place. Within a week, it was gone. No fingerprints. No discoloration. No pain. The dreams stopped as well. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking in panic. No grass, no moon, no hands testing my ankle in the dark. Sleep returned to what it used to be, empty, forgettable, merciful. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made me uneasy. I visited my aunt again, hoping for reassurance. When I told her about the bruise disappearing and the dreams ending, she listened quietly, her eyes never leaving my face. "Do you feel watched?" she asked. I shook my head. "No." She nodded slowly. "That's good," she said, "but don't mistake silence for absence." Life began to move forward again. I returned to work. I drove the same routes, laughed with coworkers, stood in traffic jams and complained about the heat like everyone else. On the surface, nothing had changed. But small details refused to settle. Sometimes, when I stood still too long, I felt a faint imbalance, as if my left leg carried less weight than my right. At night, just before sleep claimed me, I occasionally sensed something pause at the edge of awareness, then withdraw. Never touching, never pulling, just observing. One evening, curiosity overcame fear. I drove past the road behind Wat Phra Sai in daylight. The cemetery fence was still there, crooked and half-buried. The trees stood motionless, birds perched on the branches. It looked ordinary. Too ordinary. The nameless grave had changed. A simple marker now stood there, newly placed. Fresh soil surrounded it, undisturbed. No grooves, no signs of dragging, no hint of what had happened beneath the ground. I stood at the fence for a long time. Nothing moved. And yet, as I turned away, a thought surfaced uninvited, clear and cold. Some things don't disappear when they are settled. They become quiet. They learn patience. That night, as I lay in bed, drifting towards sleep, I felt nothing at my ankle. But just before consciousness faded, I sensed something else. A presence, no longer beneath me, but somewhere far away. Waiting. Chapter 14. The eyes that still remembered. I hadn't planned to go back. But some places draw you in not with fear, but with unfinished thoughts. Months had passed since the ritual, and life had settled into a familiar rhythm. The silence around me had become almost convincing. Almost. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the air thickened with heat, I found myself driving the old road behind Wat Phra Sai again. This time, I didn't stop. I didn't turn off the engine. I told myself I was just passing through. The cemetery appeared in my peripheral vision, unchanged, unremarkable. No shadows stretched unnaturally. No chill crept up my legs. The world felt ordinary. Until it didn't. As I drove past, a sudden sensation washed over me, a pressure at the back of my knees. Light but deliberate, not a pull, just a reminder of where hands had once been. I gripped the steering wheel harder. The feeling faded as quickly as it came, but my chest tightened. I didn't need to look to know what had changed. I could feel it the same way you feel someone watching you from across a room. Eyes. Not hostile. Not pleading. Aware. At a red light further down the road, I glanced at my rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw movement near the fence, a pale shape standing between the graves. Still and upright. When I blinked, it was gone. The light turned green, and I drove on, my heart pounding. That night, I dreamed again. Not of being dragged. Of standing. I was in the cemetery. Upright and unafraid, facing the nameless grave. The soil was smooth, undisturbed. No hands emerged, no voices spoke. But I could feel her eyes on me. Watching. Remembering. I woke with a strange calm settling over me. Colder than fear. I understood then that what had passed between us was no longer a struggle. It was recognition. Some connections don't end with release or possession. They end with acknowledgement, on both sides. She no longer needed me to take her place. But she knew me now. And knowledge, once gained, cannot be undone. From that day on, whenever I pass a cemetery, any cemetery, I feel it, a subtle awareness around my legs. A quiet attention focused there. Never strong enough to frighten me. Just strong enough to remind me. I am not invisible to the dead. And I never will be again.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Warning Left Behind. I never told this story to warn people away from that cemetery. Places like the one behind Wat Phra Sai don't need warnings. They endure without them, long after fences rot and paths disappear. The ground remembers what was placed inside it, and what was denied. I tell this story for a different reason. In the years that followed, I learned to live with the awareness. The quiet sense of being noticed never grew stronger, but it never faded either. It became part of how I walked, how I slept, how I chose where to stand. I avoided cemeteries at night. I never let my feet hang off the bed. I learned, slowly, how to keep my legs close to myself. Some people survive accidents and walk away changed. Others survive encounters and are simply marked. Once, during a festival, I overheard an old man speaking to a group of children. He warned them not to play near an abandoned burial ground nearby. One of the boys laughed and asked what could possibly happen. The old man's answer made my blood run cold. If something touches your leg, he said, don't look down, and don't pull back. I left before they noticed me listening. I understand now why the woman in the grave never screamed. Why she never raged. She didn't need to. The dead who linger don't hunt like predators. They wait. They wait for the living to step too close. They wait for balance. They wait for someone whose life brushes against theirs for just a moment too long. If you ever feel a hand around your ankle in a place meant for the dead, cold, patient, almost gentle, know this. It isn't trying to hurt you. It's trying to take you home. And if you are lucky, if someone interrupts, if something reminds them they were once seen, you may walk away, but you will never walk away untouched. Because once the ground beneath a grave learns the shape of your legs, it never forgets. In Thailand, there is a saying, if you feel your leg being pulled in a cemetery and you survive, never return at night. Because the dead do not forget the living who step too close. They do not chase. They wait. And once the ground remembers the shape of your legs, it may let you go, but it will always know where to find you.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.